That's David Grubbs and his brand new solo song, The Snake on Its Tail, released just as we're about to talk to David about his band, the Squanderers, and their new album, If a Body Meet a Body. We found David in Berlin and asked him what's happening with the new solo music and the Squanderers.
So that's from an album called Whistle from Above, which comes out on February 28th on Drag City. And so the first track of that and the first video,
Right.
Although I was joking yesterday, I said, it's the first video that I've ever made. But of course, I didn't lift a finger in making it. Friends of mine made it.
I've seen the video. It seems very timely with all the snow that's involved with it, because I've been following the news in upstate Pennsylvania and New York and all that, and they're getting snowed in from a bit of a lake effect thing going on there. So, So what can you tell me about the track itself and the solo project?
So the solo record, it's my first solo record in 8 years, which seems odd because it seems like I'm perpetually making records and releasing records, but I guess I do those best with other people. It's a solo record. The idea of a solo record is a funny thing because obviously in rare cases, one person does everything all by their lonesome, but in general, a solo record is still kind of a group proposition. And so these were tracks that I'd been playing by myself live. And with the album, I wanted to up the stakes a little bit. A lot of the recent records that I've made have been duo and trio records. So almost every track on this solo record involves a preferred collaborator. So Rodri Davies, Andrea Belfi, Cleek Schrei, and Nate Woolley are on the album.
And that's Nate playing the trumpet on the track that was just released today?
Yeah. And Andrea kicking up some dust on the drums.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll wait for more from when the album comes out next year for that. It's in February, I think. So the Squanderers, my understanding is that was a project kind of begun by you and Kramer and has grown into a trio. Can you tell me how that took place?
Yes. So Kramer was first in touch with me in this century when he wrote to me after reading my book, Records Ruin Landscape. We had met previously in the previous century, actually in the 1980s, in probably 1987, friends of mine in the band Unrest were recording with Kramer in New York. I happened to be in New York to be playing a show, and so stopped by and hung out at Noise New York for the afternoon. I don't think Kramer remembers that. I mean, I've told him that, and he sort of nodded politely,
right.
"Oh yeah." But I think a lot of people came through Noise New York in those years. So anyway, but I've been a fan of his since I first saw him play bass with the Butthole Surfers, probably in 1985. Actually, even before that, I interviewed Shockabilly, which was his trio with Eugene Chadbourne and David Licht, when I was in high school. So I was probably 16 years old and interviewing Shockabilly for my fanzine in front of Tooligan's Tavern in Louisville, Kentucky.
Very cool.
And so we were in contact around Records Ruin Landscape, this book. Turns out Kramer is just a kind of voracious reader with an encyclopedic knowledge of literature. So as is Wendy Eisenberg. But Squanderers happened when Kramer first asked me to collaborate on a duo recording with him, and we just I don't know if we're going to keep adding a member for each recording. That may be the algorithm that explains Squanderers, but for now the trio with Kramer and Wendy is just a total delight.
Okay.
Musically, socially, yeah. That's great.
Yeah, because it's interesting. I'm talking to somebody who's working with Kramer. We just had Dean Wareham and Britta playing here. I saw them Saturday, the other day, cool. Doing the Galaxy 500 stuff, and now suddenly here we are with it. So it's all happening. So tell me about Wendy. What is she bringing to the table in this configuration?
Wendy is just a phenomenal improviser. is a guitarist who runs circles around me. Like I
Okay.
feel like I've always had an incredible workout when I've played with Wendy. You know, my instinctive innate tempo, particularly as an improviser, is glacial. I like to move very, very slowly. I like to feel out my next choice. I like to ponder things, and I think Wendy thinks that as a guitarist, I'm kind of a curiosity, like that I kind of move in slow motion. But it all seems to gel very well, and I think that explains some of the kind of spaciousness and interest in texture in this trio. That it never feels like a waterfall of notes, rushing from above and crashing down in front of the audience.
Is that something you consciously try to avoid?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of follow my nose. I say as an improviser, almost everything from the Squanderers album are. I mean, we've done just one full day in the studio,
right?
And there's another album's worth of material from after lunch. If a Body Meet a Body was before lunch, and I think it was nearly everything that we record. I don't know. For us, it was really a kind of like lightning strike, magical morning.
Right. So I find that fascinating that you recorded it all in one day. Now it's even more fascinated to know that you recorded 2 albums in one day.
Yeah. If a Body Meet a Body was finished by 1:00 in the afternoon.
That's amazing. So, but my feeling is that you just didn't walk into the studio and start playing. That there must have been some discussion, some planning, some what do you do?
No, we did just walk in the studio and start playing. In my case, I felt that Kramer really set the tone for it. Okay, this is what we're going to do, and I was. Whenever you can ride somebody else's confidence, and Kramer really just kind of like exudes confidence in his decision making. I mean, I think it's why he's a great producer. That he's not neurotic. He's not second guessing himself.
Right.
He's very methodical and very thoughtful, and make sure that everybody else is more or less on board. But he has a strong kind of like like a strong rudder, I guess you would say. He's very certain in the directions that he takes, and kind of models that confidence. And so, I mean, I think Wendy is also a tremendously confident individual. And maybe a dirty little secret, I'm pretty damn self-confident as well. I've been doing this for a while.
You have,
but yeah. But I think that we kind of followed Kramer's lead without too much explicitly being mapped out, no instructions given for one another.
Okay.
And I think that there was just a sense that, like, when we recorded a track, then the idea would be to sort of like erase the chalkboard,
right,
and try something about as different as we possibly could for the next one. So that the sense of continuity was exploring different possibilities of sound regions of playing together.
So take, for instance, the first track is called Theme for Squanderers. So does somebody start off just playing something and the rest fall in?
For Squanderers and the reprise of Theme for Squanderers at the end of the record. So those are unique in that that's the only written material that was brought into the session. And I think that you hear that. I think that that's why it becomes the theme for Squanderers, because it is hard to start out from zero. I mean, as you suggested, like, surely you didn't just walk into the studio and start playing. We more or less did that, but that chord progression of theme for Squanderers is something that I brought in.
All right. And everybody just dove in or said,
yeah,
sure.
Yeah. Really no explanation. It was the first time that Wendy and Kramer were hearing it. I had told them that I had brought in some written material. I don't know, something that I've thought about a lot, and I've been thinking about this playing solo lately. For me, it's the challenge sometimes with improvisation is combining written and improvised material. I'm sure everybody has had this experience of feeling like a musician is really like firing on all cylinders, and then it's like, oh, Jazz Odyssey, like that a switch has been flipped. And sometimes people do that beautifully, and sometimes people are still learning
right.
how to do that. And so I'm very comfortable playing solo or in small groups with written material, like fully composed, nothing left to chance. And I'm also happy walking into situations totally blind, and just like sinking or swimming, and like living by my wits. But it's difficult to combine those two. And I feel that Wendy and Kramer, I think that this is going to be something interesting about this group, is that I think that we can navigate those different spheres of music making.
Well, you talked about the confidence that the three of you have, and from hearing you just describe that, you have to have confidence to be able to feel that you can do this, especially if you're just basically winging it and just walking in and doing it.
I think so. I mean, it's there was a surprising absence of kvetching and making excuses and can we try that again? I don't know. Again, it's one of the wonderful things about being in a group or playing music with other people, is that the group is capable of teaching you things. It's capable of giving you the opportunity to inhabit a kind of mind space. I mean, I was referring to it as self-confidence, like to assume a particular attitude that you by yourself would not be capable of doing. And in the case of Squanderers, I feel like confidence. I mean, again, like, we're just at the very beginning of this group.
Yep.
But I think that kind of confidence that's born of, the lengthy experience that we all have. I think that it's one of the things that's distinctive about the group, and it's one of the things that I like most about it. And I would say, and I would really describe it with this kind of metaphor of like riding the confidence of Kramer and of Wendy, like one, rides a magic carpet.
Right.
Or rides an updraft.
Gotcha. So the 7 tracks are all themes for something, which indicates or alludes to the fact that maybe there's some kind of cinematic thing going on as well. And of course, you've made some videos. There's a great video for theme for viewers at home. So is that what's that all about?
That was Kramer's conception after the fact, and I think it's a beautiful one. The idea. I believe that it began with him saying, I propose that one track be called, this particular track be called "Theme for Lonesome Cowboys," and I think that "Theme for" ought to be the template for titling these tracks. And I think that that's great. I'm somebody who really believes in the power of a title. the power of suggestion that lurks
Yep.
in a title, and for you to feel that there's some kind of commonality between the titles and the music, and that commonality has to do with a kind of like cinematic experience, or a possible experience of image, like a very like subtle sense of imagery. Yes, that's one never goes into these things like titling tracks with such a like clear, explicit aim, or at least I don't. And yet you're describing that as being a kind of cinematic effect.
Right.
Makes a lot of sense to me.
Right. So was there, because it could have gone downhill fast. I mean, let's face it,
of course.
You don't know. So what was the point when you all realized that this is actually working and we've got something here?
I think that 10 minutes into the session, we realized that it was working.
Right.
I mean, I had no idea what Kramer's sound would be for the session. I mean, I'm on kind of familiar territory in, this is the guitar that I always use. It's
right.
The setup that I, like the tone of the instrument for me was quite familiar. But Kramer was playing this little miniature acoustic bass that he had borrowed from someone. It looks like a kind of large ukulele with rubber strings, through an effects setup that I think that he was still kind of exploring. I mean, again, like that speaks to the level of kind of confidence and willingness to explore, even as the tape, quote, the virtual tape is rolling.
Gotcha.
And yeah, as somebody who first dips their toes into the cold water before plunging in fully, or maybe even like steps up to my knees in the cold water before plunging in fully. Kramer and Wendy are, two people who are just like willing to dive into,
gotcha.
Whatever depths.
Gotcha. Now, in addition to the solo thing and the Squanderers thing, you're doing some gigs in Berlin with another couple of musicians. So what's happening there?
Yeah, so I'm doing a couple of trio shows with Jan St. Werner and Jules Reedy. So Jan is somebody who I've known since the mid '90s. I think that he and Andy from Mouse on Mars came to a Gastr del Sol gig in Cologne, probably in 1994 or 95. And he and I have been making music together and actually teaching together. We taught several workshops together over the past 5 or 6 years. And I just think the world of Jan. He's so great, incredibly great to work with. Again, somebody whose skill set I think is very different from my own. I mean, we have a lot of the same musical reference points, but he's most at home making electronic music, making experimental electronic music in the studio. He's also a really terrific sound artist, making installations and sound sculptures. And I don't know, I just feel like he's somebody who's a little bit like Kramer and Wendy, just bursting with ideas. And I feel like we're really on the same page. There's no excuse for talking. Sometimes musicians, are they just lay all their ideas out in front of you and then practically apologize because they think oh, we're musicians, the music should do the talking.
Right.
And maybe it's apparent from this conversation. I don't know. I'm a college professor. I'm very happy talking about music. I love making music, but I also like strategizing. I like analyzing. I like pulling it apart and, seeing how it works and discussing that process. And so Jan is really great with that. We made a duo record, and then we just felt like I'm trying to reconnect. We made a duo record, and then we just felt like we had to up the ante for the next one. Jules Reedy is a younger guitarist and composer. I mean, I say younger, they're 20 or so years younger than I am. from Australia, living in Berlin, I've really loved the records they've made over the last 5 or 6 years, and that's been also a really kind of like invigorating experience. It's also, I mean, I'll say this also about playing, interestingly, in a duo with another man of my age, and then I grew up playing in bands that were just a bunch of guys,
Right.
and to me it really is. I mean, it's world changing. It's eye opening. It's totally reinvigorating to play with women, to play with people who are, Wendy is probably 20 years or a little bit more than 20 years younger than I am, and Jules
Right.
is a little younger than Wendy. It's fantastic. I mean, it's really, really great. And it's just like, it's such a gratifying thing when you're playing live. I'm 57 years old, and it's not just a bunch of 57-year-old white guys in the room.
Yep.
Sometimes it's a bunch of 57-year-old white guys in the room, but more often than not, that seems to be changing, and that makes me very happy. Like I feel like I'm continually learning, and also I just feel like I'm on the right track. If the audience doesn't look exactly like me, and the people that I'm working with don't look exactly like me.
Yep. So when you're moving on from Berlin, are you going back to professing and the SUNY
Yeah,
system?
thankfully I have the rest of the year off from teaching, so
Okay.
I'll be back in New York. I have a week of shows in the UK in March, and just working on this next book.
Uh-huh. All righty. And when do you see the Squanderers Part 2 come out? The second half of this session.
A release date hasn't been set, but I'm not such a gambling person, but I might place a small bet in saying that I think before the end of 2025, you would hear the second.
Very cool.
Second part of that magical first session.
If you enjoyed this episode of the 13th Floor's Music Talk series, please be sure to subscribe to the website or to the YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram and wherever you find your podcasts. There's a whole lot more to discover.